I haven't done this in over 15 years, so it's all good. You know, if your heart's not in it, don't do it.
Yeah.
And my heart wasn't into it. I mean, it was into making the work, but it wasn't into all the stuff, the trappings that went along with it. And that was part of the reason why I sort of received from the whole thing. And now I get to look back, and it's fun for me because it was a different life.
Right.
I mean, I look at the work like somebody else made it because it's been so long, and now I do completely different things.
Yeah.
But it's sure great to have that.
And you have to meet this man. He is the architect. He designed.
Oh, fantastic.
It's so wonderful to have you here.
Well, it's so wonderful here. I honestly tell you, I just haven't had a chance to absorb what I'm doing it because I only been over here.
Well, we've got a challenge.
And I really could have a lot of things I could say, but I would like to address anything specifically that someone might have in the way of a question about the work or any other part of the process or anything. Get me started.
Let me ask you about the masks behind you.
Sure.
The source.
Well,
What are you thinking?
Well, the early inspirations, of course, were from the Northwest Indian carvings and that sort of thing. And also at the time I was doing these masks, I was inspired by the Crow and Raven series and was fascinated by the whole tradition of the crows and ravens, and then through that got fascinated by the genealogy of the corvids and their intelligence, and then how they were used in so many different cultures. So it was a great way to explore that a little bit.
And is that piece sandblasted?
There's no sandblasting. The way these pieces are done is that we make what we call a blank, which is a small vessel that has a very small opening, and it is cooled in the annealer, and it has layers of color on it. Well, when we cool that, we can actually, the gentleman who did the carving on this is here. You'll notice by his size, he's the largest guy in the museum. Rick Allen. Rick and I worked together for decades, and he would carve out the color, and then we would put the vessel back in the oven, heat it up, and pick it back up under the blowpipe, then blow it and shape it. So the design then would follow the form that you would continue to shape. So that's why it gave it that feeling of belonging more to the shape than just being applied. That's one of the great qualities about the material.
How about the medicine jars? How do you do that?
The medicine jars, well, the medicine jars were spawned from some pieces that I found in Burma, up in the hills. They were like coconut shells and seeds that were hollowed out and used for the storage of herbs and medicines and that sort of thing. And the stoppers were usually traditional effigies of particular animals through some mythological identification from whatever ailment or spirit that you might want to have possessed. So when I saw these, it inspired me as just a concept. You could apply that to anything that I had seen in any culture anywhere, and all the myths that surround every different types of animal, whether it be birds or fish or shells or bats or things you might see. So that was a real free-for-all, and of course the idea of all the techniques we could apply to that idea. We always chose a specific vehicle, which would be the series, whether it be medicine jars or drums or masks, and then it just became kind of a free-for-all of having an opportunity to, within that particular parameter of the theme, to work with all these different little vignettes, characters, different animals or materials that you were trying to be inspired by. You were going to ask?
Maybe if you elaborated even a little bit more on the creation cycle? I mean, I'm used to, like many people, seeing blown glass and used to seeing vessels and round objects. How do you transform, I mean, how many days is it that you work on a piece like one of these masks, just sort of defining that shape? It no longer feels to me like a blowpipe shape. I honestly don't understand how you
Well, a lot of the forms have been done over a period of several days. Like, for example, to do the mask, you'd have to know what you were going to do to make the blank ahead of time. So you would spend one day, working on that blank part, and then another day engraving it, carving it, and then the next day picking it up, carving it, shaping it. But that might get stretched over a week because the cooling down and the heating up process takes longer than just a 12-hour period. Sometimes it would take a 24-hour period. So there's a lot of multitasking where you're working on several pieces at the same time, and you're trying to time it through the day, and we have what we call a garage or an oven, what goes in it, and has to get slowly heated, and annealer's cooling down. So there's a lot of juggling. So there's a lot of communication amongst the team about what's going to go on when and what gets ready, and a lot of people reminding me, oh, we're working on this, or we need to do that. And but what would happen is, as you work on one piece, you might see an aspect or an approach that would inspire something completely different. And then you might even sort of stop everything and say, well, we got to try this over here and get this started, and then we'd backtrack to where we were working. But there was a lot of inspiration that happened throughout the process because the material itself is so dynamic. And you just have to be open to that. You have to be really flexible with your schedule and what you get attached to. Because many of the pieces, you really wanted to turn out a certain way, and it didn't want to because of the way certain colors have certain characteristics. They're either hot or soft, and they might move in a way where they will not lend themselves to the form that you want. And so you have to go with these mistakes that happen and then just take a lot of credit for it.
And then on the other side, I mean, do you end up with a lot of tragedies, pieces that are in the process, you're happy with them and they just crack, they don't anneal right? Or
Yeah, you always have a certain amount of loss, a percentage, and certain pieces that we worked in had a higher success rate than others. But I can't tell you how many times you'd put a piece in the annealer and you'd think, oh, that's a really great piece. And you open up the annealer and it's a dog. And then there's pieces you put away and you just, oh, that's a dog, and you take it out and it's a really great piece. So there's that happens too, because first of all, you don't get to hold it still and get a good look at it. And the presentation on the end of a blowpipe is far different than it is when it's here in a museum or in relationship to other pieces as well. And then one of the biggest characteristics that I was really keen on was, as you're developing a new series, both technically and aesthetically, there's a naivety early on in the series that you cannot intentionally produce or duplicate. It's a time in this series where there's a simplicity about it, a primitiveness that I would always find really exciting about cultures and those aspects of the piece. And you try to make something primitive or a little bit naive, it is impossible. It has to be pure. And that would happen when we would go through a series and develop through its stage of development. It would be a moment in there which was, you couldn't captivate it. Yeah, it was very elusive.
Mama!
Could you talk about your team a little bit?
Yeah.
Who's doing what? How many people?
Well, these pieces are a real product of incredible teamwork. I work with people on my team anywhere from 10 to 30 years, and a number of them are here, and they're just fantastic people and artists in their own right, as you can see from the work in the other room. And though my approach with the team was, I learned a lot from working with Dale Chihuly. And what's really extraordinary is that you have people that are really talented and see things a certain way. And I have a saying, I don't care how good somebody's cooking is, sooner or later you're going to get sick of eating it. And I get really tired of my own cooking. And so when we would go in and I would see things a certain way, I would say to Ross, for example, I'd say, let's work on these, squirrels or hooks or whatever it may be in a particular way. And he'd be over there working, and I would see something that he would do, and I'd go, and he would do something I wouldn't do, and that would be really keen. And one thing that I learned from Dale is just because you didn't like something in your first impression didn't mean it was really good. And so many times I would see what some of these guys would do, and I would just bite my tongue, either that or I could say what I wanted to say because I paid them to listen. That if I knew that if I was patient with it enough, that all of a sudden a light might go on. And it'd be, you know what, that is really cool. And then we would head off in a completely different tangent that without their resource, I wouldn't be able to. So when we were working on this, real variety of different series, there's a lot of resource to pull from. It's amazing.
So do you usually start with an idea in mind, I'm going to make this?
Yeah, you have to have some starting point.
And then sometimes it'll go somewhere else.
Completely left field.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we will hammer it out. But again, the nature of the material is such where it's so vassal and there's so many variations. I think, I said this in the video, like for example, making corn. There's 100 different ways to make corn. And every different way you make it is going to have a different impression and a different feeling. So just by the sheer fact of you using a different technique yields a different result that has a really different feeling to it. And we capitalized on that. Yeah.
I'm still curious how you make the shape.
A lot of pushing and pulling and coaxing and swearing.
What do your tools look like?
The basic tools are tweezers and scissors. A lot of these shapes we work from the inside. So they would be kind of a long tool with a particular variation on the end, whether it be a bent rod or something not too pointy but a little bit, or a ball on the end. And we could go in and work from the outside to bring shapes like this out. And then you'd push in certain areas with certain tools to push back in. So you're always working it in and out to get that shape. We traveled to Italy 35, 40 years ago and watched the way these guys worked, and we had never seen anybody work from the inside before. And when we saw that, it changed sculpting of glass in the U.S. Yeah. Huh, Kelly, or Shelley? Yeah. Anyways, that's, yeah.
And where's your glass studio, and do you allow the public to come in and?
I don't blow glass anymore.
Yeah,
I stopped blowing glass a few years ago, and now I just work on other materials. But I worked at the Pilchuck Glass School. That's where my studio was. I never actually owned my own facility.
What materials are you working with now?
Stone and wood. Yeah. Yes.
Could you talk about how you got started?
In glass? Well, my mother was a painter, and so I was involved in being around the arts ever since I was Ren's age, this big. And so I painted and I drew, and then I had some extraordinary opportunities in school to work with some inspiring instructors in clay. And that was in going through school, and then especially in high school, I had a mentor there that really encouraged me to continue in the arts. And glass is a very natural extension from clay. It's like the entire process condensed immediately. And I was really taken by that. And I got a job at the Pilchuck Glass School as a truck driver when I was 19 years old. And part of my job was to pick up faculty. I picked up Dale at the airport.
Big step, big step.
Thank you.
The line work of the fish. And then we put it back in the oven, we pick it back up on the blow pipe. And then we blow it to its a little bit bigger, and then we lay the basket on the outside, and then we blow it even bigger, and that's what stretches it. And the consistency of the materials are different, where this is a stiffer material than this material. So it actually, that's why it looks like it kind of constricts. And then the top is added.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
Okay.
So,
It's kind of hard to explain. If you
Right.
saw it done, it's like when I'm telling you this stuff like scrawls, etches, but if you saw it done, it'd make perfect sense. Yeah.
and so the net is actually expanded when you blow it?
Yeah, everything. Well, I actually lay the net on, by just laying wrap after wrap and then crisscrossing it, and then I blow it and expand
Blow it
it.
again, yeah.
And that's what, like I said, the consistency of the colors is different. So this is a stiffer color than this, so that's why it actually indents it when it blows it out. You notice that?
Yeah, I
That's
see
what I
that.
said, it bulges. So we understand this after doing this for a long time.
Okay. That is beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. That's all I want to do is go watch myself.
Well, but there are people.
Octopus I consider to be one of the most intelligent creatures in the sea, and we actually hunt them in Hawaii. And part of the process in hunting them, of course, is locating them, finding them, and then dispatching them and killing them in a certain way. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the way an octopus is killed is you dive down, you negotiate them out of this layer, cave, and then as you're swimming to the surface, keep the tentacles moving so they don't grab on. You slide your hand across the head, you bring the eyes to the front, put the eyes in your mouth, and then bite down behind the eyes, crushing the skull, which kills the octopus immediately. Now, this is something that we do, and it sounds a little harsh, but it's something that is more humane and also almost a passage for the animal, which we use for food and as a lure for other animals.
Instantaneous, yeah.
Okay?
Very good. Okay, thank
A
you.
little bit brutal, but
This,
fantastic animal.
good. Glad you came.
The darker color is it would be the color of the pedestal. The pedestal would be the bubble. It's
The mother color. Oh, this is the color of the pencil.
The
Oh, the bubble.
dark color is completely, the bubble is a
How
dark
can
red.
this be white back in here? What's that?
That's from the acid process. When
Okay.
at the end when they do the acid.
Okay.
Or
See,
as
that
well as the
confused me.
scava.
So then where they put the sand
Correct.
is the green part.
Correct.
And it's on the marver and they make all the lines and everything.
Johnny does the
on the
drawings.
marver.
Exactly. So it looks like when you see it, it's just fish. All you see are the colored fish, and then they roll the bubble over the fish so that the fish then, so that color that comes through is the background color.
I was
base.
explaining that I thought that it was a frit and that like the difference between this color and this color was the density of the frit on the
Correct,
marble.
correct. So there's